couple years ago, I found this advertisement from Coca-Cola, which said, "Coke is like family, you can never have enough." So, as a scientist, it's my obligation to be open-minded. So I conducted a literature search to determine what potential benefits Coke might have had in mind when they made this claim. And I found the following assertion: that sugar-sweetened beverages have clinically proven superior hydration benefits compared to water. And then I sought the source of this attribution claim, and it was Kraft Foods in the Wall Street Journal, which last time I checked was not peer-reviewed. So now we can move on to the adverse, which will take us a little longer to go through. And these include negative impacts on diet quality, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, gout, osteoporosis, cavities, and even perhaps cancer. But I'm going to focus my comments today on obesity in view of the limited time that we have. So the nature of the evidence regarding sugar-sweetened beverages in health fall into four main categories: physiological mechanisms, cross-sectional observational studies, prospective or long-term observational studies, and randomized controlled trials. And after going through these types of evidence, I'll make a few comments about inconsistency in the literature and possible bias arising from conflicts of interest. So let's begin with the biological mechanisms. Sugar-sweetened beverages might cause excessive weight gain by passive energy consumption when people are drinking either to satisfy thirst or for social purposes. Everybody else is at a party and carrying a beverage, pick up a beverage and drink it. In addition, sugary beverages may have especially poor satiety due to the presence of calories in liquid form, and also a notion called glycemic load related to glycemic index, how food affects blood sugar. Now, there's no clear evidence that sugar per se affects food intake or obesity in a unique manner. In fact, the main source of calories in fruit is, of course, sugar, and fruit consumption has not been associated with obesity, in fact, quite the opposite. But sugar in liquid form may be inherently less filling, going, so to speak, underneath the body weight regulating radar system when those calories are incoming. In this study, which is illustrative of this point, individuals were given the same amount of sugar, 450 calories a day, so that's a fair amount of sugar, either in solid form, jelly beans, or liquid form, sugar-sweetened beverage. And they found that with the consumption of the sugar in solid form, energy intake, the bar on the left, declined by an amount almost identical to those 450 calories consumed in solid form of sugar. So that the total day's calorie intake was no different. But when the calories were consumed in liquid sugar form, there was no reduction in total energy intake, and so those calories contributed to energy balance. And sugar-sweetened beverages may adversely affect food intake through glycemic index and load. Now, the notion of glycemic index is that gram for gram, calorie for calorie, carbohydrates can affect blood sugar in very different ways. Of course, most sugars will raise blood sugar very quickly. That's also true for refined carbohydrates like white bread, white rice, potato products, prepared breakfast cereals. We found in a feeding study, this may not show up all that well, that when obese adolescents were given a high glycemic index meal versus medium or low, the high glycemic index meal was in yellow, blood sugar rose to very high levels for an hour or so, but then declined rapidly. What goes up must come down, and blood sugar fell into a relatively hypoglycemic range. And with that, the participants in the study became very hungry, consuming 600 or 700 calories more after the high glycemic meal than after the other meals. Glycemic load might also affect not just energy intake, but metabolism, how calories are being burned off. When we gave 39 obese young adults who were weight stable, low or high glycemic index diets and brought their weight down by 10%, we found that metabolic rate, so basically the idle of our body's engine, fell by 170 calories a day on the high glycemic diet, but it fell by only half as much on the low glycemic diet. So somehow our metabolism may be adversely affected with the consumption of too much high glycemic foods, especially when we're trying to lose weight. And in a recent multi-center study in Europe of individuals who had lost at least 7 or 8% of their body weight, and then were randomizedly assigned to one of 4 diets. Those in the lowest glycemic load diet, so a little more protein and low glycemic index, the bottom curve, maintained their weight loss entirely, no weight regain. Individuals eating the high glycemic load diet gained weight the fastest, and individuals in the medium 2 groups gained weight at an intermediate rate. So these studies suggest that sugary beverages, by their liquid form, their high glycemic load, and perhaps other mechanisms, may be having a uniquely adverse effect on our ability to control body weight. But what do the data show? Well, cross-sectional studies have suggested an adverse effect on energy balance. When 1,810 children participating in the continuing survey of food intake by individuals were examined, the ones who consumed soft drinks took in about 2,018 calories per day. Those who did not consume soft drinks took in about 200 calories less per day. So that's a substantial difference, if that is truly due to the sugar-sweetened beverages. And in another study from NHANES of about 3,000 children and adults, and this was nationally representative, comparing days with and without sugary beverages, the study found that every additional serving corresponded to a net increase in calories of about 106 per day. So that's basically suggesting that all of these calories are just adding to calorie balance. And that by replacing all sugary beverages with water could produce a decrease in energy intake of 235 kilocalories per day. That's pretty much enough to account for all of the obesity epidemic in children, that increment of energy intake. Cross-sectional studies also show positive associations with body weight, namely the more consumption, the higher the body weight, but other studies show no associations. And we'll come back to this point, but many of these negative studies were funded by the beverage industry or the sugar industry. But in any event, cross-sectional studies are a relatively weak approach to analyzing observational data. So a much more powerful approach is prospective studies, where you follow people over time. We, in 2001, in the first prospective study of this kind, looked at 548 middle school students in the greater Boston metropolitan area, and we found that every additional serving of soft drink per day increased the risk of obesity over a 2-year period by 60%. That's after taking into account other factors that could affect body weight, like physical activity level, other behavioral and demographic factors. Another study over 10 years of 141 8 to 12-year-old girls found that sugary beverages was the only snack food that was related, in this case positively, to body mass index. In a 1-year study of 10,000 children, ages 2 to 3, so these are very young children, and remarkably, these young kids today are being given sugary beverages. The children were 2 times more likely to become or remain obese if they were consumers. Turning to adult studies, a 10-year analysis from the Nurses' Health Study found that weight gain was greatest among those increasing sugar-sweetened beverages over the study period. And that was about 2.5 pounds per year. So that's a lot over a 10-year period. But it was least among those decreasing sugary beverages, and that case was near 0. And among individuals consuming sugary beverages once a day or more compared to non-consumers, the risk for diabetes was almost doubled. In a study of 42,000 men in the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, increases in sugar-sweetened beverages were associated with adverse changes in a range of cardiovascular disease risk factors. Some of these terms are, look even too technical for me. TNF-R1, TNF-R2. These are inflammatory mediators, Lp(a), leptin, triglycerides is a more common term, and low or good HDL cholesterol. And consumption was also associated with actual heart disease. So now let's turn to the randomized control trials. In this study from a number of years ago, 30 men and women were given 3 cups a day of sugary beverages or artificially sweetened beverages for 3 weeks. And they found the females are shown on the left, males on the right. During the conditions in which no beverage was given or the artificially sweetened beverage, non-caloric beverage was given, body weight either stayed the same or tended to go down. Those are the bars on the left. Whereas the hatched bar on the right showed what happened when the sugary beverage was given. Body weight increased significantly. Another study, a bit more recent, looked at 21 overweight men and women, again given 3 cups a day of sugary beverage or artificially sweetened beverage, in this case with aspartame. And you can see the 2 curves diverging. The filled circles show changes in body weight or fat mass with the sugary beverage, and the open triangles show the body weight with the diet beverage. In children, a clustered randomized controlled study of 600 children ages 7 to 11 were given an instructional program to eliminate all fizzy beverages. So in this case, it was carbonated, it was sugary, as well as diet beverages. Found no overall difference in BMI, although the study might have been underpowered for that endpoint. But they did find a difference in the incidence of overweight or obese. In other words, the number of children who were becoming obese during the study time period. And that was essentially 0 in the intervention group and 7.7% in the control group. Another related study with 1,140 students, ages 9 to 12, also got an educational program to reduce sugar-sweetened beverages. Consumption differed very little in this group, so it was not a very intensive intervention, just about 2 ounces a day. And so not surprisingly, there wasn't an effect on overall BMI, but again, there was what appeared to be an effect among the obese children, a decrease of BMI units of about 1/2. We did a 6-month study of 103 obese and non-obese adolescents consuming at least 1 serving a day of sugary beverages. We delivered non-caloric beverages to the homes of these children in the experimental group, and the control group was just followed. And we were able to virtually eliminate sugar-sweetened beverages from the intervention group. And here's what we found. In the intervention group, the data, individual data points are on the left. And we found that the higher the body weight at the beginning of the study, the more the weight loss that was obtained. That line shows the overall relationship, which was statistically significant. And I think that that's not really surprising. If a child is not, or an adult is not overweight, you don't need sugary beverages to keep you from becoming underweight. And so people may vary in their sensitivities based on internal factors or based on their current body weight. But among the group that were in the highest category of body weight, there was a significant difference, about 2/3 of a BMI unit difference in body weight. So let me now turn to comments about inconsistency in the literature. We well know that when a pharmaceutical study is funded by the drug industry, what is it going to show? It's very likely to show a favorable effect for the drug, and that's been well demonstrated, well-known bias affected by the source of funding. But this issue has never been examined in the area of nutrition in general or beverages in particular. So we aimed to examine the relationship between sponsorship and conclusion among scientific articles pertaining to 3 beverages: milk, fruit juice, and sugar-sweetened beverages over a 5-year period. And to avoid biases in our study design, well, first of all, we had no funding by any food industry. And secondly, we had 2 independent groups analyzing the findings of the study and analyzing the funding source. Then we crunched the numbers, and we found that the odds ratio, the likelihood of a favorable finding, if the beverage under study was funded by the industry, was 4 to 8 times higher.
Wow.
So what's that saying? It's in effect, like, all you have to do is really look at the funding source of a study, and if you see, the food industry, you essentially don't have to go to the trouble of reading the study. Or maybe you don't even have to go to the trouble of doing the study, because you pretty much know what the result will be. And a similar finding was from a group at Yale, a meta-analysis of 88 studies. This was focused exclusively on sugary beverages. Overall, they found a strong relationship between consumption of body weight, diabetes, and other health outcomes, but that studies funded by the food industry reported significantly smaller effects, which are going to be more favorable to the beverage interests than non-industry funded studies. So, to summarize, mechanistic studies provide plausible evidence to suggest that sugary beverages promote a positive calorie balance and weight gain. Cross-sectional studies show both positive and no associations, but these studies are limited by the nature of their design. They're more likely to suffer from confounding, reverse causality, and lack of power. Prospective studies report direct associations with weight gain, diabetes, and heart disease. Data from randomized controlled trials are limited, but they are suggestive. Some of the variability in the literature may arise from bias relating to financial conflicts of interest. Unresolved issues are whether there are groups of people, either due to behavior or underlying biological factors, who are uniquely susceptible to the adverse effects of sugary beverages. Maybe some people seem to, it's not that it's going to be good for their nutrition quality or health, but maybe some people are less susceptible to the surge and crash in blood sugar or to the other effects of sugar in liquid form that drives calorie intake. People may vary in that regard. And lastly, another key issue, which has not yet been well studied, is whether artificially sweetened beverages, diet beverages, aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, whether these are perfectly reasonable and healthful alternatives to sugar-sweetened beverages, or whether they themselves may have some basis for concern. Earlier on, there were reports of cancer associated with artificially sweetened beverage, chemicals that are used for artificial sweeteners. These were mostly from animal studies. Some of the most worrisome compounds have been removed from the market. There's probably not a strong link with cancer and these artificial sweeteners, but what does it do to the palate, to the taste buds, especially for children whose taste preferences are evolving, for them to be consuming such high-intensity sweeteners, even if they're not calorie-containing, on a regular basis? So this is an area that is in need of further investigation. And lastly, I will just announce that we've just concluded a larger study of sugar-sweetened beverages and body weight, 220 overweight and obese adolescents. This was a follow-up to the pilot study where we delivered sugary beverages to the homes, non-sugar containing beverages to the homes of the intervention group. And the primary endpoint was change in body weight. We just completed the study in December, and I'm not at liberty to present the results today, but I look forward to sharing those results at some point in the future upon its publication. Thank you very much.